Okay, I'm going to take a minute and do a lesson on ratios, rates, and proportions. So this is Unit 4 in Ed Ready. Let me go to my whiteboard. Okay, so first of all, a couple of definitions. A ratio is a comparison of two quantities. Okay, so a quick example is I could say something like, I have $15 to your $10. Okay, so what we're doing is we're comparing the cash I have to the cash you have. So we have a few different ways we can write this. One way is in words. You're seeing it right here. It's written out in words. Okay. The other way you could write this would be 15 to 10. Still kind of written in words, but it's a little bit truncated. You could also write this 15, and then you can put a colon in the middle, 10. But the way we're going to write this, since we're in a math class, hopefully this will make sense. We're going to write this 15 to 10. And then a few things that you always want to do, because we are dealing with fractions. When we write ratios and rates, we're always going to write them in fraction form. We want to make sure they're in the simplest form possible. So notice here that we're dealing with the same units. We're comparing dollars to dollars. So I would kind of cancel out those dollar signs. So that just gives me 15 to 10. But you also want to reduce this, okay? So 5 and 10 have a 5 in common. So we divide out those 5s. And we get 3 to 2. So that means for every $3 I have, you have $2, okay? And one little note that I want to absolutely make is never write a ratio as a mixed number, okay? The definition is pretty clear. A ratio is a comparison of two quantities, so we have to make sure those two quantities are being compared. We're comparing 3 to 2. We would never want to write this as 1 1/2. Okay, so ratios, they if you end up simplifying and you get an improper fraction, it stays improper. You never write it as a mixed number. Okay, so let's look at simplifying a few more of these. So let's say that we have 9 to 3. First thing we want to do is we want to write this in fraction form. So first over second, 9 to 3. And then you want to see if you can reduce this. So 9 and 3 have a 3 in common. Divide that 3 out, and we get 3 over 1. Now, this is kind of like the previous example where you had that improper fraction, and we left it improper. We didn't want to write it as a mixed number because we need to maintain that comparison of two quantities. Same thing here. We don't want to write this as just 3. Okay, if we were dealing with just fractions and we got an answer like this, we would just say our final answer was 3. But then you're not comparing two quantities anymore. So we want to maintain 3 over 1. We're comparing 3 to 1. Okay, let's try another example. Let's say I have 2.6 to 3.1. I went ahead and started this one in fraction form. And the issue here is those decimals. You don't want to leave decimals in a ratio like this. We want to simplify them out. And there's really only one exception to this, and we'll talk about that later. But when you're dealing with decimals, we have to remove those decimals, okay? So I can multiply the top and the bottom by 10. And if you notice here, when I multiply 2.6 by 10, that moves that decimal one place to the right. Same thing with 3.1. So simplified, 2.6 to 3.1 is the same as 26 to 31. You do have to be a little careful here. If you had something, for example, like 1.17 compared to 22.3, you couldn't just multiply each by 10 in this case. If you look at the numerator, if I multiply that numerator of 1.17 by 10, I would only get 11.7. I would still have that decimal, Okay, so you want to multiply by the single power of 10. Top and bottom have to be multiplied by the same power of 10, but you want to make sure you get the power of 10 that's going to eliminate the largest number of decimals. So right here, 1.17, I would need to multiply it by 100. That would give me 117. That moves the decimal once for each zero, so moves it twice. And then in the denominator, I have to multiply it by 100 again. And that's going to move my decimal once. I'm at the end of the number. I have to move it again, and I fill in a 0. So that's going to give me 117 compared to 2230. Okay, so just be careful with those decimals. All right, let's look at what you do if you've got mixed numbers. So to start, we have 2 2/3. And we're comparing it to 1 13/15. All right. Well, what we want to do here is we want to start by writing this in fraction form. And it's going to look a little weird to start. I get 2 2/3 over 1 13/15. We're going to have to do some fancy fraction work here, but that's okay. We've already gone through Unit 2, so you should already be good at fractions at this point. So the first thing I want to do is I want to convert these to improper fractions. Okay, so the numerator and denominator separately, we're going to write them as improper fractions. So for the numerator, I take the 3 and I multiply it by the whole number 2. So that gives me 3 times 2 is 6. I want to add the numerator. 6 plus 2 is 8. And then you just keep the original denominator of 3. We do the same thing for the denominator. We take the denominator in the mixed number, multiply it by the whole number. So 15 times 1 is 15. We want to add the numerator of 13. So 15 and 13 is 28. And then you keep the original denominator. So now we have 8/3 divided by 28/15. Now, this fraction bar right here, it just means divide. So really what we're doing is we're actually just dividing two fractions. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to take 8/3 and I'm going to divide it by 28/15. And hopefully you remember that trick to division. What do we always do when we divide fractions? Well, we actually multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So this is really 8/3 times, remember reciprocal, you just flip your fraction over. So we're going to multiply by 15/28. And then we want to reduce. We look for factors that can be divided out of the top and the bottom. Okay, so looking at 3 and 15, I recognize that 3 and 15 both have a factor of 3. So I divide 3 by itself and I get 1. I divide 15 by 3 and I get 5. And then 8 and 28 have a common factor of 4. So I divide 8 by 4 and I get 2. I divide 28 by 4 and I get 7. So I'm going to clean up just a little bit and I get 2 over 1 times 5 over 7 or 10/7. This is your final answer. It is improper, so remember, improper fractions as far as rates are concerned stay improper. So 2 2/3 to 1 13/15 is the same as 10/7. Let's do one more just to make sure we're good. So let's try 3 1/2. And we're going to compare it to 12 1/4. Whoops. There we go. All right, so same thing, we start by writing this in fraction form. So it's kind of that wacky fraction where the numerator and denominator are mixed numbers. And then we convert the numerator to an improper fraction. We convert the denominator to an improper fraction. So 3 1/2, I take 2 times 3, which is 6. I add 1, and I get 7/2. For the denominator, I take 4 times 12, which is 48. I add 1, which is 49. And I keep it over 4. Now, remember, this is really just division. So this is basically 7/2 divided by 49/4. Don't forget our little trick from back in Unit 2 with division. We actually multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of